All right, so Markov chains and Monte Carlo for breakfast. It'll be fun, I promise. I'm really excited about this idea that we're going to go through today. I'm excited because it strings together a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas into kind of one coherent thing all the way through the business. But I want to start off with why. Why do we do security at all? Why do we bother? Anybody have any ideas on why we even bother with security? There are bad people, yes, but why? But who cares? Why do we do it? To make money. Well, yeah, I guess that's definitely a thing. I sure do. No, but you know, for those of us working as a business, why does the business want us to do this? Protect their secrets. You're getting closer. There are two things, it turns out. We want to prevent the loss of money and prevent the loss of life. Maybe. It depends if you do that. Most of us are in the first part, the preventing loss of money, right? But at the end of the day, that's really kind of what it comes down to. We want to prevent the company from losing money or people from losing lives. And that really is the end of the road. There's a lot of other reasons people may say they want to do security, but at the end of the day, this is why. And I want to make sure that we ground ourselves in these reasons. And my message starts with one very simple thing. If there isn't a reason to do it, stop. Too many of us just kind of paint security with a big, broad brush and say, well, we're just going to do security, right? Because security. With no intent, nothing behind it, just a mandate to do security, right? We have these big compliance drives and these things that we do without a real reason. And this is how we get really complicated controls and really complicated mechanisms that basically slow us down and stop us from being able to do our jobs. Anybody work at a company where you can't do anything on your computer because there's too many things on it? You know, that's not productive. It doesn't help us at all. What we want to do is drive towards intent and reason behind what we do. And what I really want to get to is this example. So let's start here. This is a web request. Bonus points if anybody knows what it actually does or it's trying to do. But I want to take this log line. This is from an Nginx web server. A post to xml.rpc.php from a public IP address and with a Google bot user agent. Anybody have any idea what this is? Looking for a Facebook application to see if it can poke it and try to do some interesting stuff with it. But what I really care about is taking this event, right? This is a malicious request. And I want to connect this request with the boardroom. So why is that important? Why is it important to take that single event and connect it all the way through to the boardroom? It's the entire reason we're doing this. So the reason we're doing this, remember at the beginning, is getting back to preventing the loss of money or the loss of life. So this is the motivation. This is what we should be doing, right? If we're doing security and the executives in the business aren't aware of what we're doing or why we're doing it, or able to communicate effectively on and understand what it is we're doing and even spending money on, we've missed something entirely. We haven't done the right thing yet. And for a long, long time, it's been a battle. It's been difficult to go to the boardroom with security because they don't understand it. And that's our fault, by the way. The boardroom understands the business more than any of us in this room ever will, in most cases. And we failed to communicate effectively why security is important. It's become a cost center, right? It's I spend money and I don't get anything out of it, right? And it's because we haven't effectively communicated what we're doing and why we're doing it. We haven't demonstrated the return on the investment, and we haven't demonstrated why it matters. And so what I want to do is start to string these ideas together. So I want to go through the details, and this is going to be the outline for our talk today as well. So first is threat modeling. Threat modeling as a thought vehicle or experiment. I want to use threat modeling to determine how and where somebody will attack. So what's exposed? What do we see? How might somebody attack us? And develop some real concrete scenarios we want to measure. I want to create some scenarios, some risk scenarios. What might happen? What could we lose? What would be the effect of this threat model being realized? I want to create risk registers. This is the output to the business. The business sees what is the total risk we're carrying as a company. And those are kind of the thought experiments, and then we have to connect them up. So what I want to do is start to create systems that capture the threat model. So we identified a threat in the threat model, we designed a risk scenario, and now I want to build some automation to capture those events we've identified to see how often they're happening and how likely they really are. I want to create systems that update those frequencies and make our risk models come to life. And then what I really want to do is update the register in real time. So that communication with the business, that risk register, the how are we doing, what's our total risk look like, should update all the time, every day. It should be a near real-time system. What is the current risk I'm carrying based on the threats I'm seeing today? Right? We can take a lot of time to imagine what might happen, and that's great. We should do that. We should never stop doing that. But what we really want to communicate is what's happening right now. What are we affected by right now? Are we being attacked? Well, the answer is yes, of course you're being attacked, but how are we being attacked? Is it valuable to us to know maybe we should change our strategy? Maybe there's something that we're doing that we could stop doing. Or maybe there's something we should start doing that we aren't yet. And what that helps us do is as we go to the whiteboard, to design the next thing, to build the next piece, the next feature, the next system, we can take these things into account and use those as we design our systems. They're useful architectural tools. What's our current risk is a great way to figure out whether or not I should spend a lot more time up front thinking about the security of the thing I'm building. And finally, we want to repeat this, right? As we get to these updated real-time registers, we want to go all the way back to the top and figure out if those threat models we created are still valuable and meaningful and update them. And we just repeat all the time. So it's a constant cycle. What this does is it creates security with purpose and intent. And when you do security, it should be like any other feature or any other thing you do. There's a reason behind it. How many of you take and build a feature of a system with no idea what it's supposed to do? Any of us? I mean, I do sometimes, I suppose. But this is how people should be treating security too. There's no reason not to have a reason, right? And purpose and intent should be driving that. You should figure out why you're doing security and apply those reasons behind building real security. Buying a product from a vendor and putting a box in the network doesn't really solve a problem. It's just buying a box from a vendor, and then how you apply it is what really matters. You have to understand your threats before you design your controls. So before we can understand what we need to do, we need to understand who's going to be attacking us and what they're after. We have to understand where we need to fit in the whole equation, right? A lot of us want to be on the left, right? It's not that we have to be the best or the most secure. When you're the most secure, you're a target. You want to be somewhere ahead of the last people. You want to be a little bit less attractive than the most attractive targets, and a little bit less attractive than the most attractive targets. So you're somewhere in the middle, right? In terms of the easiest to attack and the hardest to attack. You want to blend in. You don't want to really stand out. But that gives an understanding of where you want to be. We want to figure out how we understand threats. Truly understand threats. So threat modeling is my idea for this. I love threat modeling as a vehicle for thought. There's a lot of people who have tried to explain threat modeling and distill it down into a sentence or a paragraph or whatever, right? But I have a more distilled version of it. Really, for me, threat modeling is drawing, documenting, and prioritizing. That's it. I want to talk about threat modeling, but I'm not going to cover methodologies. Just to kind of understand where everybody's at in the room, how many of you are actively doing threat modeling right now? Great, okay, so a fair amount of people. I'm not going to go after any of the traditional threat modeling methodologies. I'm going to talk about kind of the basics behind it. You'll recognize some things that are extracted from current methodologies, but I want to kind of just ignore the rules and start with the small ideas that make this work. And then you can apply that to whatever methodology you use, back at your job. So we have a couple of things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open our diagrams. If you don't have diagrams, now's the time to start making diagrams. So I know that for a long time we had this rejection of big design up front. We don't want to design our systems up front and spend too much time. We want to have evolutionary architecture and build systems as they go, and that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But we do want to draw what we're going to make, or draw what we have made, so we have an idea of what it looks like, a picture. And when we have our boxes and lines, every time we have a line, add a protocol, right? How is that line communicating? How does this line talk to this line, and what's information traveling look like? For every box, we want to label the assets, both in transit and at rest. So what information is traveling over that line, and what information is sitting in between those boxes, or staying on those boxes. And then if you have any controls, what controls exist on those boxes and over those lines? And then we want to draw boundaries around logical network groupings. So maybe you have a data center, and then you have an office, and you have another office, and you have a coffee shop, right? Logical network boundaries can be big. They don't have to be really, really discrete. But you want to understand where is there open internet in between you and somebody else, or untrusted connection. Next, we have a couple more things to do. We want to identify any assets that have either weak or missing controls. So once you have that picture, it's very easy and obvious to tell where you're missing a control. And then you want to figure out, how do you get in? You may have exposed things on purpose, like a website, but how else do you get in? How do you manage a system? Is it SSH? Is it VPN? How do you get in and talk to your systems and manage them, update them? And the next thing is the absolute most important thing you can do, because we can all do this stuff pretty easily. But you want to understand what the business objectives, goals, and risks are. Without a business risk, there is no actual risk, right? If we go back to the beginning of the talk, preventing loss of money and loss of life, that's what you have to tie this to. You need to identify a real risk. There needs to be assets at risk. And you want to map those business risks to the assets that are missing controls or have weak controls. So you're tying the technical risk to a business risk and creating a real tangible thing. And of course, you want to prioritize, right? Anything that's really critical should become first. And that's why threat modeling for me is that vehicle for how do we get to focus. So here's a picture. This is where we start. So obviously your drawing style is yours to choose, but this is kind of what I mean, right? I have a database, I have a web application, I have 2 trust zones. I'm going to call one a coffee shop or maybe a conference, and one my data center. And so when we see this drawing, we have a single asset and a single control. There's way more that should exist here, but this is kind of the start of this, and I want to make it really clear on how we may draw and think about this. So just by looking, before we go further, there are at least 2 problems with this drawing, 2 security issues that we can see right away. What are they? HTTP, what about it? Should be HTTPS. Why? There's open internet between. And why else? Yeah, the person's at a coffee shop, right? So there's plenty of reasons why. The coffee shop is one example is more important, right? And now, we haven't done anything yet. All we've done is create a drawing. So we haven't done any threat modeling yet. We've simply just created a view of the system. So this by itself is incredibly valuable. If you don't have this, make this. You'll need this for threat modeling anyways, and the result is actually kind of nice outside of security. So once you have the foundation, you then create the attack scenarios. So then we start to put bad actors, or my little cyberpunk emoji thing. We put them in different places, and then think about it. They don't always have to stick around, but you put them in different places. You put somebody else in the coffee shop. You put somebody on a PC. You put somebody in the web server. You put somebody in the data center on the network. You put somebody on the database, right? We put them in different places and think about what could happen if they were there. So I mentioned there were 2 obvious things. What's the other obvious thing here? Especially now that you see this drawing with these actors in different places. Look at the very far side of the drawing here, the right side. What's sitting on the database? Login credentials. What's not sitting on the database right now? Any controls? If you were going to store passwords in a database, what control may you want to put to protect somebody from seeing those passwords? Encryption, close. Hashing, password hashing, right? If I was to assume the passwords are stored safely, I would have a controller that said I hash the passwords, right? That's the kind of explicit thing you need to have in your drawings, right? Because that makes it very obvious. Oh, I'm protecting against somebody being on the database and looking at passwords in plain text. Because if somebody got there, I wouldn't want them to just know the passwords right away. I would want them to try to apply some kind of effort before they finally realize the passwords are reinforcing. Now, again, this is a small example, a very simple example. There are other things we may be able to figure out as we go here, and we may want to apply. We can get really detailed, but that's not for this talk. But as we put these actors in different places, all of these scenarios here are reasonable, right? Somebody could be sitting in a coffee shop. Somebody could have control of a computer through malware. Somebody could have broken into a web server. Somebody could have broken into a data center and been on the network, and somebody could eventually be on a database. Now, turns out if they're in the data center, they're probably going to get to those different pieces. Those are all real. I want to make sure that as we go through this, we focus on reality, right? If you're a small retail commerce company, you probably don't have nation states trying to hack you, right? Don't worry about that, right? If you're an airline company, you probably will have that. So it depends on what you're doing and what your business goals are, what your exposure is. You know, when you think about capabilities of actors and reality, make sure you ground yourself, right? We can spend a lot of time thinking about the most complicated and advanced attackers on the planet, but if they don't apply to us, don't worry about it, right? Focus on the things that you think are real day to day. Because you want to clearly define the capabilities of the actor as well. It's not just where they might attack you, but it's how good they are, and then how good you need to be in response to that. And you want to, of course, understand what that business impact is. What is the true business impact of them getting in? Right? If somebody stole an account, if somebody got access to your database, if somebody was able to manipulate data, what do those things look like? What is the results? What is the business impact here? If somebody turned your systems off, right, shut you down and made you unavailable. Once you get there, then you derive risk. This is hard, by the way. So risk is actually one of the most complicated and misunderstood things out there. Mostly because there's immature models. I want to apply a model of risk here that I think is really valuable. It's born in technology. It's not a financial model. It's a risk model born out of cybersecurity. It's called the FAIR model, the Factor Analysis of Information Risk. Now, it has an ontology, and that goes way deeper than this. This is kind of the top level of the ontology, and I want to talk about it for a minute. I want to use this model on how we derive risk. So the first thing is we want to know how often, threat event frequency. So risk is made up in two parts, right? How much and how often are you likely to lose something? So if you have a loss event, how many times will that happen? And when it happens, how much will you lose? To get there, we have to take some measurements. How often is somebody likely to attack you is definitely one of them. Loss event frequency, right? That's a combination of how often somebody will attack you and how vulnerable you are. And I'll talk about how we get to vulnerability and threat event frequency in a moment. But really, that's the how much. So how many holes do I have? What's the likelihood of somebody being able to get through them? And how often are they going to try? And the next is, how much will I lose when this happens? Risk is a guessing game. It should be educated guessing, but it's still guessing. And when we do this, we want to have a range. Risk is never a number, because we're not exact. We have no idea. We're guessing. It's a range. It's between this and that. So you have a primary loss and a secondary loss, and then, of course, probable and worst case loss. How much are we likely to lose? And what's the worst case scenario, right? What if everything we have was stolen? And when we have how much and how often, we get risk. Now, the problem here is we run into our first problem. What do you think it is? So we can understand from the business what the impact might be. But on that left side, what don't we know yet? We don't know how often. We don't know the threat event frequency. What I mean by this is, how often will a bad actor act in a way that could cause a loss? How often will they try to do something nefarious or malicious? Anybody have a good idea of this? Yeah, so I mean, this is our answer. We kind of like, it's like that much, right? No idea. So this is important. This is truly important to understanding risk, is how often will this really happen? So we draw a circle around something, and we make a guess, right? How often might somebody get on and infect a computer and then make some bad requests to our application? Well, that depends on a lot of things, right? But how often might somebody try? That's what we're going for. I can make it easier and say, how often might somebody try at a coffee shop or maybe a conference Wi-Fi, for any of you that are on the conference Wi-Fi right now, to sniff traffic, unencrypted traffic on a network? Anybody doing it right now? We're at a security conference after all, right? So if you're on the public Wi-Fi, this is the time to get scared and maybe put the VPN button on, or just don't join at all. So again, this happens a lot, right? Likelihood of somebody doing that is actually pretty high. And if we have unencrypted traffic, it's very easy, right? The risk, the overall risk, if you have sensitive information that's unencrypted, is actually should be quite high. So in order to determine risk, we still need to identify how often. How often will this happen? Now, we actually have the information. We just don't use it in effective ways. We actually need to apply the information. There's a lot of ways to do this, right? We can do it with a SIEM. Anybody have an active SIEM in their environment at the moment? Anybody have no idea what a SIEM is? All right, so the overwhelming majority in the room, a SIEM is effectively it's a security event management. When something bad happens, it records it. So somebody tries to make a bad request to a website. That first request I showed you, that will get logged into a SIEM. A computer gets infected with a virus, and log it to a SIEM. Somebody logs in to an account from an unknown place, it gets logged to a SIEM. Any kind of event that is nefarious, malicious, gets logged. And a SIEM is kind of the aggregation of all that. So think of your whatever logging tool of choice is, Splunk, Logstash, Kibana, query analysis, any of those kind of tooling. Think of that, but the only view you have is of security events. It's effectively what it is. Now, those are great, but sometimes we do custom tooling. We build something that analyzes this and looks for interesting things. We may have custom tooling partners. There are lots of different tools out there that will look at your application logs and tell you when it sees a malicious attack, or maybe it just tells you when you have performance issues, right? Those can also be indicative of an attack. There's a whole bunch of custom tooling you can add here. And if we have some time, I'll show you what I mean by custom tooling. I've written log parsers and analyzers that kind of parse events and look for nefarious things. But whatever you do here, you want to use that data. You want to collect that data and use that. Because when you see it, that becomes threat event frequency. How often will this likely happen? Now, you may have to aggregate multiple sources to get that idea, but we have the data because we have the logs. We need to make sense of them. Once you have that, you can deliver value, because what you have now is a model, a scenario. You have the event frequencies, you have the impacts. You can deliver some actual value to the business, and the result is focus and prioritization. When it comes to security and you need to make a choice, how do you make a choice of what to do next? A lot of us are like, oh, I think that's the most important thing, and so we all go over there, right? If we do this, we know what the most important thing is, unless we miss something, which is totally reasonable and happens. But what we do is make an educated choice on where do we go next. In general, security is like kids on a soccer field. They kind of go after the ball, and everybody kind of flocks here because, oh, meltdown inspector happened, or this thing happened. And so we all rush to whatever we think is the most critical thing in the world. And it turns out we probably forgot to lock something, like the front door, right? We maybe have an API endpoint that's unauthenticated that should have been, that's leaking all of our data out, right? Way more important than patching for something that came out. So we need to be a little more conscious and aware of how we make our choices and how we organize them. But this talk is about adaptive threat modeling. So let's pretend we're doing all that. And let's pretend we've gotten good at this. So you may have realized that things change. Most of the time, all day long. And they change a lot. Every day, actually. The things I just showed you take a lot of time. To sit down and draw everything, and model everything, and create scenarios, and create a register. This is several months of work to an active company. If you're just starting out, it may be a little bit easier, but if you thought about the time it would take you to do this at your current job, it's going to take you quite a while to get there. You're not going to get there quickly. It took a lot of time to get here and do this, and then you have a snapshot of the world as you saw it when you made this model once a year usually, right? If you're going to do any compliance, they're going to ask you to do this once a year. So that's really ineffective, because that's good for about the next 10 days, right? So you spent 2 months, 3 months worth of work to get a view of the world that's active and realistic for probably 10 days to maybe a month. And for those other 11 months of the year, doesn't matter. It's probably changed. So we need a better way to deal with this, right? We want to be able to think about this as it relates to our business every day. So we want to actually automate this. So we want to start building those threat scenarios automatically. So the threat modeling thing is a great start, because we think about it all, and we think about what might happen, and we're right some of the time, and we're wrong some of the time, and that's fine. It's a guess. But we want to automate this in a meaningful fashion, and that might sound odd, because I talked about ways to get there, but the automation part is interesting. For me, it's about behavior. Behavioral analysis. So both predictable and irrational behavior can be modeled. What I mean by this is that we design systems for people to use them. And in our design, if we've done it right, they'll act in a certain way. This is where user experience and security actually become incredibly useful. They're the same thing, right? Normally, user experience and security are kind of at odds. They're not really great together. But if you design a predictable path that everybody follows all the time, you've won, because you've designed a predictable path that everybody follows. And if you're in business to make money, that's a good thing. But if you do that in terms of security, it creates a pattern that everybody follows. So when they stop doing that, there's an anomaly, something that's different. It's irrational. You can model both these things. And when you have those anomalies, that's where you start to create a view of possibly new threats. You could think about this as a series of requests in a state transition model. So maybe a directed graph, right? You end up with something that looks like this. That's all this is, right? It's a directed graph. It's a bunch of requests that go from one to another to an end state. When you have this directed graph, you can start to produce Markov chains for behavioral patterns. A Markov chain you can apply to a series of requests to say, oh, an actor is somebody's trying to steal credit cards. An actor is somebody trying to do that Facebook attack I showed you at the beginning. That's a one-state thing. But most attacks have more than one transition before you understand what they are. And in order to identify those attacks, you may need to understand what they do in 2 or 3 requests, or 5 or 10 requests. Now, it might take you a while to get there, but you want to do that the fastest way possible, the least number of requests. So you could say, oh, well, they posted to the login and they never did a GET request. So that's definitely, maybe they're probably a robot. So every time they do something a little bit off the chain, you can see that. And maybe they might take 10 requests to prove they're an attacker, but all you need is the first 3 to know where they're going to go next. Because everybody that does this always ends up here, right? And you can short circuit that path. Or if you're not sure, you can do something called predictive Monte Carlo on the Markov chain. Say, oh, well, their choices from here are these 3 things, and most likely, for my sample size, I know they're probably going to end up here. And you can lump them into buckets before they ever get there. This is really interesting because, at first, these are manual analysis, right? So I might create a few of these Markov chains after I see some interesting things in my log. But we have the data to create these automatically. We can use clustering algorithms to tell us kind of what sets of actors are alike. So I use the word I hate. It's a whole machine learning thing. But I can apply statistics to this. I can use clustering algorithms, k-means, k-nearest neighbor, support vector machine algorithms to show me, hey, what sets of actors look alike, right? Show me pockets of people who are doing the same kinds of things. And you'll have a big spot of people doing normal stuff, and you'll have a pocket of confused users because your design wasn't quite right, or maybe you changed. And a pocket of users who are doing a certain attack, and another pocket of users who are doing a different attack. And each one of those pockets, it probably represents a different set of state transitions you may want to look at, right? And so these clustering algorithms are great to identify pockets of users and pockets of people who you may want to put into these diagrams or into these models. And you can use that request information to give you identifiably malicious transitions. These Markov chains that are super valuable that say, oh yeah, I definitely know they're an attacker. Or you can use them to know, oh, my new design is terrible because there's no identifiable pocket of good users. People use this path and this path, and there's business intelligence outside of security here that tells you that your design sucks. So there's multiple uses here, even outside of security. But when you have this identifiably malicious thing, you record it. Once you find it, you record it. And that's that threat event frequency thing. Once somebody starts down a known path, you watch them, right? You're not sure they're malicious yet, but they've started down that path. You know, they've hit two of the 5 pieces of your chain. You know they're probably going to end up at that 5th state. You record it. They're suspicious. Somebody took that path. Record when they go down that path, because inevitably, once you start blocking them, they're going to evolve. Anybody done a cat and mouse thing or back and forth with a robot before? How often did you win? Yeah, they just keep changing, right? So they might have a user agent of curl. You're like, oh, let me block the curl user agent. And then tomorrow, they say they're Googlebot. And so you have to do something else. And then that path they take, you block that off, and they create a new one. They update, right? Everybody's after something, and they'll keep going. And it's not fair, because your job is to run a business. Their job is to attack you. They spend 100% of their time attacking you, and you spend like 5% of your time defending against them. It's not fair, right? And so they're going to eventually win unless you have automation that makes them go away. And you can take this incredibly far. Once you accomplish this, you can identify intent capability. So what I told you was just how often an attack happens. But that doesn't actually explain everything here, right? What are we missing? What did I talk about earlier that's vital to understanding risk that we haven't done yet? We don't know the capability of our attacker yet. We've done a bunch of stuff to say when an attack happened. We don't know who's behind that or how sophisticated they are, right? That intent and that capability are incredibly important to risk analysis. I'll run you through a risk scenario in a moment. But capability can be identified through these chains as well, right? Using Markov chains, you can show capability. Because let's say somebody does the classic scenario, they're a robot, and they post to the login endpoint, and they post to the endpoint they're trying to attack. And those are the only 2 requests they ever made. They're obviously not a human, or a standards compliant browser, because they would have done a GET request. They would have taken a little bit of time to type some information in. They would have clicked a button to go to the next thing, right? That behavior is obviously anomalous, right? So a scripted attacker, unsophisticated attacker, would just have a script that did this over and over and over again, and you turn them away really quickly. But a more advanced attacker would come from a normal user agent, a normal browser. They might even use a browser and drive it automatically. And they would do a GET request, and they would do a POST request. And they'd simulate latency between requests. They may even simulate mouse movement. So it turns out, if you put an overlay on your screen and you look at mouse movement, you can tell a robot from a human. Because robots just go to exactly where they want to go on the page without really doing anything. But a human will have fluid natural movement. And so you can look at those kind of behaviors as well, and you can create chains of behavior based on that, and know that, oh, somebody might be a little more sophisticated. They might be trying to blend in, try to go unnoticed. Maybe the frequency of requests is very low. Maybe they're doing it from 1 million IP addresses versus 1 or 2. And so they might be doing things that are way outside of your capability to identify. But you'll get there eventually. And so, these Markov chains can not only show you that an attack happened, but how sophisticated the attacker is. And once you get there, you can build these threat models in near real time, right? So it's obviously not real time because it takes a while to propagate through the system. But the goal here is to do this in near real time. I saw a Markov chain, identified one, I recorded it, and then when I had a frequency update, I reran my risk model, and I got the updated risk. So that's the path from the request or set of requests to the board. The board sees that risk register all the time. They can pop it open, they can look at it and say, oh, my company is carrying N million dollars of risk right now. And if you think it's less than $1 million, you're fooling yourself. Every company from the start has somewhere around $1 million of risk at least. And So it's $N million of risk that I'm carrying today, based on the scenarios I've seen in front of me today, or over the past 30 days, or the past 60 days, or 90 days. After that, it's stale. But we want to be able to do this because we want to be able to show the board and the people that run our company what they're seeing so they can make the right kind of choices, right? This is where you want to be. None of us are here yet, including myself. You turn this into continuous risk analysis, right? That's the whole point. Every time something happens, I'm running my models. Because models are just models. They're programmatic. You can write this stuff in any language. I'll show you a couple, when we're done. It allows you to justify what you're doing based on right now, right? You may have a control in place. Maybe you have a CAPTCHA on your site. Anybody have CAPTCHAs on their site? Thank you. They're horrible. You may want to take a control or add a control based on what's happening in front of you right now. And honestly, you can do it on specific actors. So maybe a specific actor is posing more of a risk to you than somebody else, right? A risk model can be aggregate, or it can be a specific actor. So maybe somebody's doing something weird and you're not quite sure yet. And you could run a simulation and say, oh, this specific person, I think, or robot, may be causing me more problems than they're worth. Let me go ahead and add a control. Maybe I'll add the CAPTCHA. Please don't. Or I'll add something that may slow them down, some friction, right? It gives you the ability to apply control to certain scenarios. Or maybe we're going to build something new. We say, you know what, in the past, we've always done this type of authentication. It's really aggressive. People are confused by it. But we have never seen anybody attack us in this way. So maybe this time, this new system, we're gonna drop that control. We're going to remove it. And we'll look at it and model it and see how it goes over time. And if that works, maybe the rest of the systems that we have will then adapt that model, right? So we evolve our security based on what we're seeing right now. And we don't always have to apply everything to everyone. Again, it's based on risk. One control may be good for one scenario or one group, but it may not be good for others, right? Maybe some people in your company have no data that's important. They don't need all those super big controls. Maybe what they're doing is looking at competitors. All they're doing is gaining intelligence on competitors. They don't have any access to data. Maybe they don't have to have all these rigid sets of controls to do what they do. But maybe you're running the whole system. Maybe it's really important for you to have two-factor on everything you do. Because if somebody gets your keys, they get the keys to everything, right? Apply it in the right ways. Active risk registers tell everyone the story. When we have a risk register that's updated all day long, we see what we want to see, right? We see attacks, we see things that can help us inform the rest of the company on how they should act. But the magic here is not in the technical details. The magic here is in the dollars and cents. At the end of a risk scenario, you have a qualified loss. It's low, it's medium, it's high. But you also have that dollar range, right? When I show you the example here, you'll see this ends in dollars and cents. That's the way it's supposed to be, right? The CEO of a company can't make a choice on how to spend on security if you tell them they have a vulnerability. That's insane. When you tell them that, they'll just say, so, who cares, right? But if you tell them, you know what, I think we're going to lose $2 million this year based on this thing, I'd like to spend $50,000 to make it go away. Now what we have is a real conversation. That's a tangible conversation that anybody in the boardroom can say, oh, yeah, that seems totally reasonable. Now, a good executive team will say, well, why do you think it's $2 million and why would $50,000 save it? You need to have a good, a detailed story to tell. But these registers are part of that story, right? Because they can say, well, you know what, yesterday this wasn't the case, but today it's the case. Why is that? What happened? And you can say, oh, we were attacked yesterday. This is a real data, right? Yesterday we had this attack. We think, based on everybody else on the internet saying they were also attacked, this will happen again soon, right? Maybe in the next month. One of my examples is from last year. There was a very big DNS attack. It was an amplified attack that took out a majority of the internet. It was big enough to take out part of Amazon. And that day, the internet stopped for most people, right? Netflix was affected, Twitter was affected, some DNS services were affected. It was massive. After that, they called it, kind of the IoT meltdown, where all these little Internet of Things devices were attacking everything. People decided, oh, we don't want that to happen again, right? But before that happened, nobody thought about it. After it happened, everybody thought about it. But the people that reacted or overreacted were wrong. People that took some time to think about what could happen designed better controls, and they designed them in a way where it didn't cost them a fortune to prevent it from happening again, right? People saw the symptom, the DNS attack. Oh, let's put a lot of money into fortifying DNS and fortifying the volume of requests we can have happen. And everybody else said, why don't we turn off UPnP on our routers so that the devices just can't get out when they get, when they get hacked, right? Very simple solutions that was simply a setting on a router that already existed. They spent a little bit of time and not much money to do it, right? It's more about the impact. What do we do? How do we spend the least amount of money to get the most amount of return? And that's where that discussion with the business, when you're really thinking about what's the least amount I can spend to have the least amount of loss, or the acceptable amount of loss, that's where you win. It's huge valuable. So doing this, right, when you turn that risk register into an active real-time thing, you're in constant communication with the business. You might not talk to the business every day. You probably won't talk to your CEO every day unless you work in a small company. But they can, at point in time, pull up that register, take a look, and say, oh, here's where we're at. And if they ever go above a certain point, pardon me, maybe an alarm goes off and tells the CEO, hey, by the way, what we're seeing right now represents a larger risk than you're comfortable carrying. We've gone over our threshold. So our threshold might be $2 million. We have attack scenarios that are real, that are happening today, that are putting us in a place where we're seeing what could possibly be a $5 million a year risk. The CEO gets a page and has to respond to it and say, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? And you talk. And when you get that kind of reaction, that kind of conversation, you'll always get what you ask for. Is anybody here working in security most days? So how often do you get whatever you want all the time from the business? Rarely, right? I always do. Always do I get what I want, because these are the kind of conversations I have, right? I get what I want because I don't ask for much, and what I ask for is grounded in actual numbers, dollars and cents. It's not hard to get what you want, as long as you're speaking in terms of reality, business, right? Yes, I want to patch every server, and yes, I want to have the best static analysis tools for the software I write, and yes, I want to have all the best things in the world, but when I'm there, I have wasted the business's time and money. I haven't served the business well. What I want to do is just enough. And what you want to do is be able to react to what you're seeing in quantifiable ways, right? Guesses, low, medium, high, those kind of things are important for us to talk about things in relative terms. But if I'm going to go to the business, I need quantifiable data, right? A life insurance company is going to ask a bunch of questions and derive a model based on quantifiable information and say, yeah, you're worth the risk. Or, no, you're not worth the risk, right? We have to get that same level of maturity when we talk to our businesses. Is it worth the risk? Should I accept it or should I change it? But it gets everybody involved, right? We are not the only people responsible for determining what kind of security we should add to our company. I've talked to so many CEOs that say, oh, I have no idea why they're doing that. No idea, right? I spend $10 million a year on security. I say, well, why? And they tell me, well, because they told me I needed to spend $10 million in security. And I trust them. It's a terrible answer, right? When you can say, oh, I spend $10 million, and here's the amount of risk I'm willing to carry as a business, and I'm spending $10 million because my risk is about $100 million, and I think based on the set of controls that they've told me about, and not controls in terms of, oh, MFA, right? Oh, well, what they told me is if somebody gets my login credentials, I have this thing on my phone that I push a button for, or I type a number in, and that makes it sure that if somebody gets my password, they can't reuse it, right? They understand the control in terms of the effect on the company, not the technical nature of the control, right? So you take time to explain the controls in a way that makes sense. What does this do? Oh, why is this button here? Or why can't I ever log into this thing? Why does it take me so long to get there? That's usually a smell. But it gets people involved and makes them make informed choices. That's the most important thing, informed choices. Why are you spending the money you're spending? It's all about these models. And most importantly, you can't do it all. There's no way to get all the way there. There's no such thing as secure. Secure does not exist. for lots of reasons, but mostly because we can't ever get there, right? If you were to tell me you were secure, I'd call you a liar. But most importantly, I'd call you a fool, because it meant you spent way too much money on security, right? Now, if you're protecting from loss of life, you probably can't spend enough money. If anybody's doing that, don't listen to a thing I said. But if you're protecting against loss of money, there is such thing as spending too much. And you can't do it all well, right? There are so many things in computing in general that are deep specializations. A lot of us are pretty general. Some of us go semi-deep in a few topics, but we can't do all of it well. We can't be the most up-to-date people in the world on antivirus, and we can't be the most up-to-date people in software security and database security and firewalls and network design and everything, and operating system security. And we've proven to ourselves that those insane things can happen over the past couple of weeks where chip manufacturers have crazy bugs in their chip design that we never knew about and existed for 10 years, right? There are things that come up that we could have never predicted. And so we definitely can't do it all well. All we can do is react, right? So we have to learn to focus on what matters. That's the big part. We have to focus on what matters. We can only do so many things, do the right things. So before I show you a couple of examples, I want to give you a couple links. So threatmodelingbook.com. This is Adam Shostak's book on threat modeling. It is what I would consider the best book out there on threat modeling. The ideas and topics that he talks about are great. It applies more deeply to larger organizations. So you may have to take some of it with a grain of salt and apply it back to kind of a smaller company if you work at a smaller company. But again, my favorite book on threat modeling at the moment. The middle link, unfortunately there was no real good URL, is my favorite book on risk analysis and risk management. Now, I know it can be a far topic in terms of not effective to day job, but I promise you reading this book will get you in a lot of places. It's great. It's by one of the guys who created the FAIR model in the first place. And so it really talks about how you think about risk. And so if you've never used the FAIR model ever, the topics they discuss there and the way they talk about risk is awesome. I highly encourage that anybody reads it. Now, the bottom link, I created a Jupyter notebook that is the FAIR model and includes a full Monte Carlo simulation and everything into it. You type in examples, back it up, and then you run through the Jupyter notebook. It'll do a full Monte Carlo analysis of that scenario and give you a range. And so if you want to play with FAIR model, it's a great place to start. There are commercial tools out there as well from a company called RiskLens, which is that creator of FAIR. He has a company that does this in grand fashion. But this is kind of a quick way to start. And those are my kind of getting started pieces. And underneath that FAIR notebook, it's all just R code. Take it, use it, change it, do whatever you want with it. Totally free to use. But that R code could be extracted into that that kind of tool behind the scenes that runs your scenarios. And in fact, I've done that in several cases. And so you can extract that and make it the start of your continuous risk analysis and your register creation. So with that, I have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll take time for questions, and if we don't have many questions, I'll show you what some of these things look like in code. So we'll start with that. Questions? Yeah. Do I find it tricky to handle false positives? Yes. False positives and false negatives are both a big thing. Now, measurement is hard. Measurement is very hard. We get things wrong all the time. And actually, as the environment changes, our assumptions have to change with them. And the reason we have so many false positives and false negatives is we keep a basic set of assumptions and never reject them. And so when we think about measurement, so we also have to think about the null hypothesis, right? What does normal look like? Or maybe even normal, what does an attack look like to us? And the way we have an event is when we reject the null hypothesis, right? Oh, I have a standing thought, and this breaks my standing thought. Now, because I break it doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's different. But it means I have to change my thoughts. So I may assume a new null hypothesis based on the new information. And so what I find is a great way to deal with those false positives and false negatives is strong beliefs loosely held, right? I have a thought, and it can change at any moment with new information. And we have to be fluid in how we think about things in order to adapt to false positives and false negatives. So yes, it is hard. But I think the hardest part is that we tend to stick to a basic assumption and never change it. And if we can't do that, we'll never get there. Yeah. How does this apply to smaller companies? Same way, right? What I talked about, you can do in a very loose fashion, a very small fashion. It doesn't have to be a big enterprise thing. You can still make drawings. You can still record events. You don't have to have a SIEM. You can put things in your normal log system, right? You throw things into Logstash, you throw things into Sumo Logic or Splunk. Make a couple of reports and views that are just based on security and use those to update events, right? Take what you've got and make use of it, right? The fair notebook I told you, you can use that. You can automate, you can extract the code out of there and run that through as automation, right? You can do it in a loose or cheaper fashion and not spend a ton of money to get there, right? With a smaller company, you probably have more access to the CEO and the people that run the company, or maybe you are the CEO. And so, think about the loose definition of the tools. They can still be applied. The concepts apply to any company. I highly encourage startups to do this kind of exercise. Because a lot of startups will go through a period where they're finding a market, and they find it, and they get that first round of funding, and they've ignored security, and that's great. Every startup should probably ignore security until they figure out whether or not the thing they're building is worthwhile, right? Because otherwise, it's going to take too long to get there. But once you get there, you have to stop and focus. And so it's especially important for that kind of A-round series of startups to focus on this stuff the right way. Because if you've ignored it and now all of a sudden you're starting it, you have to figure out where to go first. And so actually a majority of my clients are all those companies that just found their market and said, where do I start? What do I do, right? This stuff helps you figure out what to tackle first. And so as a small company, it's incredibly important to do that exercise as soon as possible, right? Yes, it's great to do it early on, but I don't advise people to do that until they know they have a product that people want to buy. So find the market fit, but then definitely do these exercises. Other questions? Yeah. Yes, the question is, are there any tools I can drop in to kind of build these Markov chains? Not yet. I'm certainly working on them. There are tools that will help you identify attacks, right? And so definitely you can use those tools like, oh, I found an attack. And you can look back and see what they did and build a Markov chain from that. But there's no like drop-in logs, extract Markov chains tool. And in fact, that's an implementation detail. What you really want is let me know when an attack happened, right? For me, that part matters because I can use that to do a bunch of things. Let's say I have a Markov chain and I have a group of actors and I block them and they evolve. So I have first generation, second generation, third generation. And I have my normal flow Markov chain. As they evolve, I know what their possibilities are. There's a finite series of requests they can make. I can start to predict where they're going to go next. So I can say, oh, I have first generation, second generation, third generation. Oh, they evolve like this. Here's the evolutionary pattern that they're taking. They're going to do this next. So I know that I'm going to start blocking this generation, and the next generation, they're going to go here. I can predict it. So I can do some really cool stuff in terms of knowing what their next move is. When I do that, I can always stay one step ahead, and I'm not responding or reacting. I'm actually planning. When you get there, it becomes really way more valuable. And so while the Markov chains are an implementation detail, they're useful for larger things than just creating that, oh, here's what an attack looks like. I'm going to use it to be proactive. So to answer your question in a long way, no, the tools don't exist, as far as I know, to extract a Markov chain. But again, I want to caution, that's an implementation detail. A couple more minutes. Yes? Yes. So for small companies that change every day, you have to automate, right? If you're moving quickly, The only way to really get a good view of this is to build the automation, right? If you're working at a bank that releases once a quarter, these are easier, right? You can do these on a regular cadence. But if you're at a startup that deploys 10 times, 20 times a day, and everything you do is responding to everything that happens daily, the automation becomes so much more important. And so I would say for startups, the automation is way more relevant than a bigger company that moves slower. Make sense? All right, any more questions? So we're just about out of time for me to give you an example, but I'm here all day, so grab me if you're interested in seeing some code or seeing some more examples. I have a bunch of stuff that I built, and I'd be happy to show it to you. We have less than 2 minutes left, so it's probably not enough time to go into detail. So thank you very much, and come find me if you want to see some examples.